When Hulk Hogan was discovered lifeless inside his Florida home, the world assumed it was simply the closing chapter of a wrestling legend's life. What followed left everyone speechless. Beneath the official conclusion of a heart attack, investigators started turning up details that simply did not add up. A personal gym that appeared completely undisturbed, a security system that had been switched off from within the property, a concealed room tucked behind a sealed basement wall, and a phone call received 3 days prior that left one of the most fearless figures in sports visibly rattled. What federal agents uncovered raised questions nobody had anticipated needing to answer. The morning Hulkamania came to its end. On the morning of July 24th, 2025, word spread out of Clearwater, Florida, that professional wrestling icon Hulk Hogan, born Terry Jean Balea, had been found unresponsive inside his residence. He was 71 years old. The first alert arrived through a desperate 911 call reporting cardiac arrest. Emergency crews reached the mansion and launched resuscitation efforts without delay. Paramedics fought to bring his heart back to life. Every attempt came up short. At 11:17 in the morning, physicians at Morton Plant Hospital declared him dead. For fans across the globe, it was a finish no one had ever pictured for a man who had long stood as a symbol of strength, toughness, and an outsized force of personality. Early reports moved fast. The medical examiner identified the cause of death as an acute myocardial infarction, a sudden devastating heart attack. The ruling was logged as natural. To most observers, it felt like a reasonable conclusion. Hogan was well into his 70s. His body had absorbed decades of professional punishment. A lifetime spent body-slamming giants inside the ring, relentless time on the road, and more than 24 surgeries. The physical toll was thoroughly documented, but the story held more layers than a straightforward case of heart failure. His medical background added context that sharpened the picture considerably. Hogan had been quietly managing leukemia, a serious blood condition, along with atrial fibrillation, a disorder in which the heart beats in an irregular and unpredictable rhythm. Both conditions sharply raised the likelihood of sudden cardiac arrest. Together they painted a portrait of a man carrying heavy, largely hidden battles behind the public-facing image of someone still showing up at events and flashing smiles for the cameras. Even still, his death did not settle comfortably into a narrative of natural decline. He had been seen training not long before he passed. People close to him said he looked healthier than he had in years. His wife, Sky Daly, regularly mentioned that he had thrown himself into meditation, clean eating, and daily physical activity. He seemed to have reached a kind of steady balance in his later years, far removed from the turbulence that had defined so much of his past. That made the sudden ending all the more difficult to process. The officers who first responded to the mansion noticed more than just Hogan's body lying there. Something about the environment struck them as off. Given those observations, and given the stature of the man involved, they concluded the situation warranted a deeper examination. The Clearwater Police Department carried out multiple witness interviews and pulled together his medical records. While they accepted the medical examiner's determination, they also pointed to what they described as the distinctive nature of the circumstances surrounding the death. This was not the passing of an ordinary private individual. It was the death of one of the most widely recognized athletes on Earth, and any lingering question had the potential to grow into something far larger. That determination brought federal authorities into the picture. The FBI was discreetly drawn into the investigation, not purely to validate the medical findings, but to examine any irregularities identified at the scene. For a death officially recorded as natural causes, that was far from a routine step. It drew attention immediately. Behind the wave of tributes and the carefully worded official statements, a separate story was already beginning to take shape. One constructed around questions that simply would not go away. Why was the scene characterized as unusual? Why did federal investigators feel the need to dig further into what had been presented as a natural passing? And what exactly did investigators discover inside that mansion? The spotless gym and the silenced alarms. Among the first areas federal investigators examined when they entered Hulk Hogan's home was the gym. This room had been his personal sanctuary. Those close to him described it as the one place he never let fall into neglect, stocked with weights, machines, and mementos from throughout his career, a space he kept returning to even in his later years, driven by a commitment to holding on to whatever physical strength remained. On the morning his body was found, the room bore no resemblance to a place anyone had recently worked out in. The gym was almost unsettlingly immaculate. Every surface had been wiped clean. The weights sat in perfectly arranged order. The floor mats showed not a single mark from recent use. No water bottles, no towels, none of the small traces that naturally build up when someone actually puts in a workout. For someone whose daily habits reportedly included regular training sessions, the flawless condition of that room stood out immediately. Investigators noted that it felt less like an active fitness space and more like something that had been purposefully cleaned, arranged, and staged before emergency services ever arrived. Attention then moved from the gym to the broader security setup throughout the property. Hogan had put considerable resources into protecting his home. The system featured multiple cameras, motion sensors, and backup safeguards built to resist tampering. He had a well-known habit of guarding his privacy carefully. Investigators naturally expected to find detailed digital records, logs tracking movement in and around the property during the hours prior to his death. What they actually uncovered was something far more troubling. The entire security system had been manually switched off from within the property itself, not knocked out by a power outage, not brought down by any technical failure. Someone had walked up to the control panel and turned it off on purpose. That discovery carried significant weight because doing so required both familiarity with the system's layout and knowledge of the access codes needed to override it. At the same time, there were absolutely no signs of forced entry anywhere on the premises. Doors and windows were completely undisturbed. Nothing pointed to anyone having broken in from outside. The only reasonable explanations were either that Hogan had switched off the system himself or that someone with trusted access to the home had done it for him. The investigation was turned over to federal forensic specialists. The FBI deployed teams focused on cybercrime and digital analysis, with instructions to examine every component of Hogan's security network and smart home infrastructure. These systems store logs, detailed records of when cameras are activated or deactivated, when alarms are set or disarmed, when any adjustment is made to the system. By rebuilding that timeline, investigators hope to determine who held control of the house during the critical hours before Hogan was discovered. They also went through his smart home devices, thermostats, lighting controls, automated features capable of revealing whether anyone had been moving through the rooms. In modern residences, those details carry genuine evidentiary value. Even something as minor as a light switching on or off can help establish that a person was in a particular room at a particular moment. Despite all of that work, the digital evidence failed to produce a definitive answer. The security system had without question been disabled, yet the records offered no indication of who had done it. No unauthorized access originating from outside the property was detected. The data pointed towards someone physically present inside, either Hogan himself or another individual who had been there alongside him. As forensic teams pressed on through the electronic evidence, they recognized that the next logical step was examining Hogan's personal communications. The explanation behind these strange discoveries might not be hidden in the devices inside his home, but rather in the conversations he had carried on during the days leading up to his death. The mysterious phone call that left Hogan unsettled. As investigators pieced together a picture of Hulk Hogan's final days, one particular detail surfaced that seemed to stand completely apart from everything else. 3 days before he died, late in the evening, Hogan received a phone call that appeared to shake him deeply. Everyone present in the house that day recalled it wasn't what he actually said during the phone call that stood out to them. It was the look on his face once he hung up. His wife, Sky Daly, later told investigators she had never seen him respond quite like that before. Hogan wasn't the type to show fear easily. Decades spent in professional wrestling had trained him to handle pressure and maintain composure in virtually every situation. But after that call ended, she described his face as showing something genuinely frightening, an expression she said she had never once witnessed across all the years they'd shared together. He gave no explanation about what had been discussed. He simply went silent, and that silence from a man, typically so vocal and expressive, told her immediately that something was very wrong. Investigators wasted little time establishing that the call was far from ordinary. Digital forensic teams set out to trace where it had originated, but what they uncovered revealed a serious effort to hide its source. The call had been deliberately routed through multiple servers, spread across several different countries. Every time investigators followed the signal forward, it bounced to yet another point along the chain. Pinning it to an actual origin proved next to impossible. That level of technical complexity wasn't something you saw every day. Rerouting a call through international servers, a method using proxy networks and relay systems, demanded both considerable technical knowledge and deliberate, premeditated intent. Whoever was behind that call had absolutely no desire to be identified or found. The FBI weighed several different explanations. The call could have served as a warning. It might have been tied to some form of extortion, with someone pressuring Hogan over private matters. A third theory suggested Hogan might have been in possession of sensitive information someone wanted kept quiet, though no solid evidence pointed clearly in that direction at the time. What all investigators could agree on was that the call was no accident. It had been carefully planned and deliberately concealed, and it had left a visible mark on the man on the receiving end. According to Sky Daily, Hogan said very little throughout the conversation itself. He spoke only briefly before bringing the call to an end. For a man widely known for his expressiveness and bigger-than-life personality, that brevity suggested that what he'd heard required no reply, that he grasped its meaning instantly, and the weight of that understanding settled heavily over him. The timing only deepened its significance. 3 days before his death, his life had seemed entirely steady. He was recovering from a recent surgery, keeping up with his routines, and spending time at home with family. Nothing in his daily schedule hinted at any kind of upheaval or distress. The sudden appearance of a heavily disguised late-night phone call against that otherwise calm backdrop was impossible to ignore. The contents of that call have remained classified. What is certain is that before it arrived, Hogan appeared calm and at ease. After it, the people surrounding him clearly noticed a man now carrying a weight he hadn't been carrying the previous day. Fractured family, broken peace. Behind the glittering surface of Hulk Hogan's professional career lay a private life shaped by tension, loss, and deeply complicated relationships. For federal investigators trying to determine whether anyone close to him had played any part in his death, his family history became one of the most thoroughly examined areas of the entire investigation. His first marriage to Linda Claridge back in 1983 produced 2 children, Brooke and Nick, and for many years projected the image of a solid, all-American family. The reality television series Hogan Knows Best, which debuted in 2005, reinforced that impression for millions of people watching at home. On camera, Hogan appeared as the proud, hands-on father balancing wrestling stardom with the demands of domestic life. The truth was considerably more layered. In 2007, reports of infidelity began to emerge. A woman connected to Brooke alleged a romantic relationship with Hogan, which he firmly denied. Regardless, the marriage crumbled. Linda filed for divorce that same year, bringing 24 years of marriage to a close. The separation played out publicly and was deeply painful for everyone involved. Accusations flew from both directions. Hogan would later admit that during the period following the collapse, he fell into serious depression and came close to taking his own life. After several difficult years, he remarried, this time to Jennifer McDaniel in 2010, in a quiet, private ceremony. The marriage stretched on for over 10 years before it quietly dissolved in 2021. Unlike the first split, it attracted very little public notice, yet it added another chapter to a familiar pattern. Hogan's personal life seldom found any real lasting peace. His third marriage came in 2023, this time to Sky Daily, a yoga instructor. Their relationship moved at a fast pace, and the engagement caught some people close to him off guard. But friends who spent time around the couple noticed something had shifted in him. She introduced a kind of calm into his world. He called her his anchor, someone who grounded him and helped him lean into his health and a quieter, more settled way of living. Whatever doubts people had about the relationship, those who actually knew him agreed he looked genuinely content during those final years. Not everyone in his family felt the same way. His daughter Brooke had skipped the wedding entirely and had been keeping her distance for quite some time. The relationship between them had been under strain for years, worn down by the very public scandals that followed Hogan's name around, including a widely covered, leaked tape. Brooke had made the choice to pull away from family gatherings. And while she would occasionally speak of her father with respect when asked publicly, the gulf between them was hard to miss. That gulf became far more meaningful once he was gone. It came out that Brooke had been taken out of Hogan's will before his death. His son Nick was named the sole beneficiary of an estate worth nearly $5 million. That decision caught a lot of people off guard and immediately stirred questions about why Brooke had been left out completely. Some read it as a final statement on their estrangement. Others suspected it pointed toward unresolved conflicts that had never been properly addressed. For those conducting the investigation, this detail was not something that could be set aside. Inheritance tensions and financial grievances are routinely factored in as possible context when someone dies unexpectedly. While no hard evidence pointed to wrongdoing within the family, the fact that one child had been entirely written out while the other inherited everything was a thread that absolutely had to be pulled. Hogan's long history of emotional difficulty added yet another dimension to all of this. The depression he had openly talked about during his first divorce, the suicidal thoughts he had admitted to during interviews, none of that was ancient history. It was woven into who he was, and investigators knew well enough that emotional wounds can shape choices and relationships long after the surface appears to have healed over. Still, the family situation alone could not account for everything the investigation had turned up. The next piece led right back to Hogan's physical condition and to a surgical procedure carried out just weeks before he died. Surgery, whispers, and a body already pushed to its edge. By the time Hulk Hogan had reached his 70s, his body had absorbed a lifetime's worth of punishment. He had been one of the most physically demanding performers of his entire generation, hauling massive opponents around the ring, absorbing brutal landings over and over, and traveling without pause for decades on end. That way of life had required more than 24 surgeries, among them procedures on his back, hips, knees, and shoulders. Hogan had spoken candidly about the price he had paid, recounting back operations that left him temporarily unable to take a single step. Each surgery kept him going, but also piled new layers of fragility onto a frame that had already been pushed well past its natural breaking point. The most significant of these procedures took place on May 14, 2025, when Hogan went under the knife for a 4-level anterior cervical discectomy and fusion, a procedure known in medical circles as ACDF. During that operation, surgeons extract damaged discs from the cervical spine and fuse neighboring vertebrae together to restore stability and take pressure off the spinal nerves. A fusion spanning 4 levels covers a much larger portion of the cervical spine than a routine procedure, demands a longer recovery, and brings with it a proportionally higher chance of serious complications. For a 71-year-old man already managing both leukemia and atrial fibrillation, those risks were not small. Medical experts have pointed out that ACDF, performed across several spinal levels, can put the phrenic nerve at risk, the nerve that travels from the cervical spine down through the chest and governs the diaphragm's function. If that nerve sustains damage, a patient may experience sudden respiratory failure with absolutely no prior warning. The diaphragm ceases to contract, breathing becomes insufficient, and in the most severe cases, the heart eventually follows. Some accounts that circulated after Hogan's passing suggested his phrenic nerve may have been compromised during the procedure, though nothing along those lines was ever officially confirmed. After the surgery, rumors began circulating fast. Radio host Bubba the Love Sponge told listeners that Hogan was in critical condition and might not pull through. His wife, Sky Daly, pushed back on that directly, saying he was not in a coma, that his heart was strong, and that he was steadily improving. She described the rumors going around as harmful and flat-out inaccurate. She held firmly to the position that while the surgery had been serious, things were moving in the right direction. In the weeks that came after, Hogan appeared to back that account up. He was photographed grinning, greeting fans, and getting back to light exercise at home. One widely circulated photo showed him standing with supporters outside his Clearwater property, looking alert and standing tall. His son Nick said he seemed more focused on taking care of his health than he had been in a long time. People who encountered him in person described him as driven, even upbeat, not at all the image of someone in physical decline. Still, complications from multi-level cervical spine surgery can emerge weeks or even months after the procedure, frequently without any obvious signs beforehand. When investigators went back over the timeline following his death, a key question came to the surface. Had the surgery played a role in what ultimately happened? If the phrenic nerve had been damaged, his breathing could have failed abruptly, setting off the cardiac arrest that the medical examiner had documented. A man already living with atrial fibrillation, a condition where the heart struggles to hold a steady rhythm, faces a significantly greater risk if oxygen levels drop without warning. That possibility meant his death could have been connected not only to the natural deterioration of his body over time, but to a medical procedure that had taken place fewer than 3 months before he died. Sky Daily has since indicated she intends to pursue a medical malpractice lawsuit, a move that speaks to how seriously she regards that possibility. And while that question remained unresolved, investigators made another discovery during a second search of the mansion, one that pulled the entire investigation in a direction nobody had quite seen coming. The hidden room in the basement. During the second forensic sweep of Hogan's home, federal agents came across something that immediately shifted the nature of the investigation. Concealed behind what looked like an ordinary section of wall in the basement was a hidden room. It appeared in none of the property records held on file with the county. No building permit or renovation document that investigators could track down made any mention of it. The entrance had been built to blend seamlessly into the surrounding wall, constructed with enough precision that only a thorough, deliberate search, tapping along walls, comparing measurements against existing floor plans, would expose the inconsistency. There were no handles, hinges, or visible seams on the exterior surface. It opened by way of a mechanism that required specific knowledge of exactly how to activate it. Getting inside meant already knowing it was there. Within the room, agents encountered an unexpected degree of order. Documents were stacked and labeled carefully, arranged in a manner that pointed to a well-established system maintained over a long period rather than materials thrown together in a hurry. The contents spanned personal correspondence, financial records, legal documents, and medical paperwork. Certain files made reference to business dealings and associates that had not come up at any earlier stage of the investigation. Most notably, certain documents reportedly bore dates as recent as the day before Hogan passed away, suggesting the room had been visited during his final hours, and that whatever he had stored or reviewed there had remained important to him right up to the very end. The contents sparked immediate questions. Some files were fairly straightforward, medical records, financial paperwork, but others pointed towards something far harder to categorize. Folders held references to contacts and communications that simply did not line up with Hogan's public image as a retired wrestler living a quiet life in Clearwater. Some accounts, unconfirmed and handled cautiously by federal officials, suggested that certain files may have included information tied to outside pressure or possible blackmail. Whether Hogan had been holding on to that information as a form of protection, or whether having it had made him a target, remained an open and deeply troubling question. The FBI stayed measured about what it chose to reveal. Officials confirmed only that the investigation remained active and that no determination about foul play had been made. Requests for any comment on the room's specific contents were flatly refused. That silence gave room for speculation, and coverage spread quickly, hinting that Hogan's private life may have been far more complicated than the narrative of a retired wrestler simply seeking peace, the image his recent public appearances had projected. For his family, the discovery left behind a tangled mixture of emotions. They wanted answers. But a hidden room full of organized private documents, recently accessed and kept secret from everyone around him, made it harder to fully understand the man they thought they knew. The version of Hogan who had appeared calm, settled, and at peace in his final years now existed side by side with a version who had felt the need to build and maintain a concealed space nobody was ever meant to discover. Reconciling those two versions proved enormously difficult. A man who had spoken openly about finding peace, stripping life back to its basics, and prioritizing his health, had at the same time been maintaining a hidden archive that even those closest to him knew absolutely nothing about, and with so much of the room's contents still classified that reconciliation stayed well out of reach. The legacy and the lingering shadows. Hulk Hogan's passing in 2025 brought down the curtain on one of the most celebrated careers in the entire history of professional wrestling. To millions of fans, he was something far greater than an entertainer. He was the defining face of the WWE throughout the 1980s and 1990s, the man who pulled the sport into mainstream culture and made professional wrestling a topic discussed in every household. His legendary body slam of Andre the Giant at WrestleMania 3 remains among the most replayed moments in sports entertainment history. Even people who had never once followed wrestling knew who he was. His presence, his catchphrases, the enormous energy he brought to absolutely everything. His influence stretched well beyond his own generation. Performers who rose to fame after him, Dwayne Johnson, John Cena, and others, have openly acknowledged that the platform Hogan constructed made their own success possible. The worldwide reach that professional wrestling enjoys today traces a direct line back to what he helped build. The questions surrounding his death, though, have not settled nearly as neatly as his legacy has. The official cause was a heart attack explained by leukemia, atrial fibrillation, and the accumulated physical toll of his career. For many people, that was enough. It fit his medical history, and at 71, his body had certainly carried its share of damage. For others, the details that emerged afterward, the disabled security system, the spotless gym, the classified phone call, the secret room, painted a picture that felt like something beyond a natural ending. Legal proceedings added yet another layer to it all. Sky Daily has signaled intentions to pursue a medical malpractice lawsuit, contending that the spinal procedure he underwent in May of 2025 may have caused damage to the phrenic nerve and played a role in the respiratory failure that triggered his cardiac arrest. No court has confirmed that claim as of yet, but the possibility of a surgical mistake continues to be an active thread in the wider discussion. His estate, worth close to $5 million, passed entirely to his son Nick, while his daughter Brooke received nothing. That choice reflected just how fractured that relationship had become and drew scrutiny from those who follow the financial dimensions of high-profile deaths. Investigators flagged it as relevant background without drawing firm conclusions. At the time this account was put together, the investigation was still open. Law enforcement and federal agencies were continuing to go through medical and digital records. Family members had been assured they would receive a full briefing before anything was released publicly. The unresolved status kept speculation running hot, and every additional delay added to the feeling that something had not yet been fully brought to light. For his fans, the whole situation created a difficult tension. On one hand, there was the remarkable career, the many decades of entertainment, and the cultural footprint of a man who made professional wrestling mean something on a worldwide level. On the other hand, unanswered questions continued to gather around his final days, like a storm that never quite broke open. Did his body simply reach its limit after a lifetime of extraordinary physical punishment? Did hidden pressures and conflicts speed up what was already inevitable? Did a surgical procedure leave behind a weakness that his heart ultimately could not overcome? Or did that phone call 3 days before he died carry something that no investigation has managed to name? The full truth has not been established. What still stands is the legacy. Murals painted on walls in Clearwater, decades of memories passed around the world, and a story that has not yet delivered its closing line. Hulk Hogan may be gone, but the complete account of his final moments has not yet been written. Drop your thoughts in the comments because this story is still very much unfolding.